They say, see Naples and die. A night in Bridgwater could also fit the bill. A sleepy town of just over 40,000 in Somerset, on the edge of the Somerset Levels near the better-known Taunton. Over to you, James.
This episode again focuses on crime and misdemeanours in the west of England, with this sorry tale unfolding in a quiet village called Wemden, a few miles to the east of the old market town of Bridgwater in North Somerset. The year is 1950 and it's mid-April. It's early morning when a local farmer, a Mr. Moat, rose from his bed and glanced out of the window onto a cool, crisp dawn. Still weary from sleep, he thought that he saw what he took for a sheep in one corner of his neighbour's field. Somehow it looked out of place, but dismissing that thought, he went about his early morning routine. The village has changed little over the decades, being a small rural community going about their daily lives in an orderly way. In common with similar hamlets up and down the country, it had a population of around 100 or so, with a church, pub, local shop, with local employment focused mainly on farming. A simple life, but a rewarding one. Farmer Moat was not the only one to notice the seemingly innocuous animal anomaly. The owners of the field in question arrived in order to round up their cows and take them to the milking parlour. One of the farmer's young sons, after breakfast, decided through natural curiosity to go and investigate this out-of-place sheep in an area that was more accustomed to growing crops and rearing dairy and beef cows. He soon hurried back with the news of what he had found, closely followed by the owners of the field in question, who urgently asked to use the telephone in order to call the local police in Bridgwater. What had been discovered was the severely injured naked body of a young woman, her clothing having seemingly been ripped off and scattered on the ground around her corpse. In due course, the police arrived at the scene of the crime and went about their business investigating in the field. It must have been a very harrowing sight. A short while later, the body was identified as being that of Lily Palmer, a 26-year-old who lived locally. She had a patchy employment history, having worked in a number of jobs including a mill worker and a domestic, but was currently unemployed. The inevitable post-mortem revealed that she had multiple injuries to her head and neck, with the cause of death revealed to be asphyxia. It only took the police a matter of hours to identify a potential suspect, a 24-year-old by the name of Robert Atwell, who was a resident in the town. He was swiftly apprehended at the local gasworks, where he was an employee. After a rigorous interview by the police, it was arranged for him to go before a specially convened hearing in the evening at the town's county magistrates' court. The charge brought before the court was that of the felonious murder of Lily Palmer. He was, unsurprisingly, remanded into custody, and after a further hearing in May, the case was referred to the Somerset Assizes in Wells, a nearby city, and the date was set for the trial in June. At the trial, a whole backstory emerged, not only for Atwell, but also for his victim Palmer, which cast light on a series of events that eventually culminated in the tragedy in a quiet rural field. On the evening in question, both had been drinking in a pub in Bridgwater called the Horse and Jockey, and having been there for a couple of hours, they both left mid-evening. Witnesses stated that they both appeared sober, but this is hard to believe because of the time that they had been in the pub. Atwell was later seen by someone who knew him in the early hours of the following morning, near to where Atwell lived with his uncle, who stated in court that despite the hour, his nephew seemed quite normal in his opinion. But Atwell was firmly in the frame for murder, as he was the last known person to have been seen with Palmer prior to her death. In one of his statements, he admitted he'd been drinking in the pub with Lily Palmer, but stated that at one stage he had left the bar to go to the skittle alley, and when he returned, Lily had left the premises. When his version of events was questioned, he changed his story and admitted that he had in fact left the pub with Lily and they headed over to the fields of Wemden. On their arrival at the field, events started to unravel. According to Atwell's testimony, he requested Lily to strip out of her clothing, which he claimed she had done willingly, and in turn he started to undress as well. They started to cuddle together in the grass for some minutes, exchanging passionate kisses as a prelude to having sex, but he was unable to complete the act. At this point, Lily, who was clearly up for the encounter, started to mock him, telling him that it had been a complete waste of her time coming all this way from town. At this point, Atwell's testimony continues, he completely lost it and attacked Lily. He punched her in the face, continuing the violent attack with more punches and kicks before putting his hands around her neck and squeezing the life out of her. When he finally regained his senses, he realized what he had done, seeing the brutalized dead body in front of him. He dressed himself and returned home. The following morning, when he woke up, he noticed the bloodstains on his clothes and grazes to his hands. Whether true or not, he had intended to hand himself over to the police, but only after he had finished his day's work. As we know, it was at his place of employment, the gasworks, that the police arrested him. During the trial, the prosecution challenged Atwell's account of what had happened on that fateful night. They theorized that, in fact, he had told Lily to strip naked, which she refused to do, and rebuffed his advances. His frustration had turned to rage at this rebuttal, and so ensued a violent, sexually motivated attack on the defenseless girl, being kicked and punched, her clothes being ripped from her body, continuing the attack as she lay helpless on the ground. Atwell, as can be imagined, disputed this version of events, even saying that he had no idea how the girl's clothing had come to be torn. The court records reveal that additional evidence was given about the mental states of both parties involved. It casts light on two interesting points. Firstly, Lily, 3 years earlier, had been certified as being mentally defective. Atwell, it was revealed, had a long history of mental illness. He did not have the best of upbringings, as he was illegitimate and never knew his father. His mother was out of the picture for whatever reason, so it was left to other members of the family to bring him up. His uncle gave evidence that from an early age the young boy was not easy to control and periodically had a violent temper. As Atwell progressed in years, he showed signs of childlike behaviour. One example was an occasion when he was caught stealing money that had been put aside to pay the family's bills. When caught and admonished, he had burst into tears like a baby. Testimony was given that he had been very backward at school and found it difficult even with basic subjects. He had been very affected by the death of his grandmother and was equally distressed by the death of his girlfriend at the time. After these two events, he stopped looking after himself properly and became sloppy and unkempt. When told to get himself together, he merely cried. It appeared that he had once been in the army, but was dismissed as he failed a basic competency test. Atwell started to drink heavily and often came home the worse for wear, often appearing to be in a dreamlike state. His aunt had sometimes had to shake him back to his senses. His behaviour got so bad that unless he improved his behaviour, he would be thrown out of the house. A doctor from the Royal United Hospital in Bath told the court that he had examined the accused on 3 separate occasions and testified to his mental instability, the extent of which was not enough to render him certifiably insane. He would often fly into a rage and lose control, especially if he was teased about his illegitimacy. At this stage of evidence giving at the trial, the judge interjected in order to give some directions to the jury on the legal definition of insanity, pointing out that it had to be established if the accused was aware of his actions and what he was doing, or was not aware of the fact that these actions were wrong. Dr. Gibson clarified some of his statements to say that Atwell may indeed be unaware of his exact actions and what he was doing at the time when he committed the crime, and could in fact literally take leave of his senses. The time had come up for the judge to deliver his summing up to the jury, and to ask them to think about 2 key facts about the case. Firstly, there was the post-mortem evidence, which showed Lily Palmer had not engaged in sex on the day of the murder, consensual or otherwise, and that the attack by Atwell could not be considered rape. Secondly, the torn clothes contradicted what Atwell had stated, including the fact that the victim had willingly stripped when requested, and indeed those clothes had been violently ripped from her body. The question that the jury should think about: was Atwell indeed insane, as had been suggested, proof of which the defence had been unable to provide? It was further pointed out that on the night in question, Atwell had gone home fully aware of his actions, leaving all the evidence of his crime in the field. Despite this, he behaved in a normal manner, as if nothing had happened. Was this calm demeanour a result of madness, or that of callousness? The jury was sent out to consider their verdict. As it happened, it only took the jury a few minutes to come to their verdict. They felt that the calm callousness of the accused led them all to agree that he was guilty of the brutal murder of Lily Palmer. As it happened, it only took the jury a few minutes to come to their verdict. They felt that the calm callousness of the accused led them to all agree that he was guilty of the brutal murder of Lily Palmer. The judge in his sentencing stated that it was one of the most horrible and sickening murders that he had come across, sentencing Atwell, who seemed unmoved by what was happening around him, to be hanged. He died by the noose at Bristol Prison on Thursday, July the 13th, 1950. John, now what's your take on these events?
The staple of the wicked uncle is a constant in all literature, of which the most famous in the English canon is that of Richard of Gloucester in Richard III. You could never describe Atwell as a wicked uncle. Basically, he was simply inadequate. The British Army needed every single able-bodied man, but he failed a simple intelligence test. She was no fair maiden, but that does not make any excuses for his action. Illegitimacy at the time was seen as a serious stain on a family's character, and accordingly, families would make great efforts to cover it up. The author was told of one family that pretended that a daughter who had an illegitimate child was his sister. What is society to do with the likes of Atwell? He had the body of a man and the brain of a child. These types of people are very dangerous if provoked. If you would like to know more about this episode and the other West Country murders in this series, you can visit our website vintagemurders.uk or on our YouTube channel.